Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us at the Future of Experience Designers panel talk. We've got a bunch of amazing guests here, familiar faces, industry veterans, and we've got a lot of interesting topics to talk about. So I thought an interesting way to dive into this was we kind of go around, do a one sentence introduction of ourselves, and answer the question, what does blockchain mean to us or to you, whether that is coming from the background of an artist or a business owner or a studio owner, or even just someone interested in cryptocurrencies. So, Jamie, how about we start with you, my friend?
Hi, Elburz. Hey, guys. So thanks for the opportunity to come in and riff some questions around this important topic close to everyone's heart. So I'm Jaymi McManus. I've lived and worked in Singapore for the last 16 years, originally from the UK. I'm probably the oldest new kid on the block because I came into this industry as a career shift at the age of 40, having spent 15 years in corporate. So complete, didn't look like this, had no beard, short hair, tie and all the rest of it. Um, uh, and then started my own independent agency called Mischiefmakers. Mischiefmakers is an experiential design practice that likes to create experiences for people. Um, when I say I'm the oldest new kid on the block, it's actually so the curator and founder of CryptoArt Weekasia, George Galley there, had introduced me to the term NFT. Surprisingly, even though I've been in IT industry for over 15 years prior to that, in January this year. So that's the first time I heard about NFT and blockchain. Heard about blockchain before, but what it means to me, briefly, I'd say is it's very transformative. I think as we look through the applications that are now available and run across the different rails that are out there, the thing that I'm most excited about is how it's liberating artists, liberating otherwise secluded groups of people, and I think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening there. And it's enabling some really new, fresh, and dynamic connections.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think we're gonna have some good topics in there. Joshua, what about yourself, my friend?
Hi, I'm Joshua Davis. I usually am in New York, but I'm actually in a log cabin right now. I'm in the mountains of Aspen, Colorado, teaching a week-long interactive programming workshop. So I'm literally in the woods in a cabin. So hopefully the internet connection is good here. I guess I'm an old school guy. I've been doing interactive generative design work for about 26 years. I started back in 1995 when the only computer I could afford was Linux, and the monitor that came with that computer was in one color. You either had a choice of amber or green, and mine was amber. So I'm definitely the old timer here. Spent about 15 years in Flash, and then eventually migrated into other technologies like Arduino and processing and C++ and Notch. And so for the most part now, I just teach interactive art making. So sort of making interactive art on my own and also teaching it. So for me, blockchain is kind of an interesting shift for me because I think because I've been in technology for so long, again, I don't know when you guys started on the panel, but memory was a huge issue. Hard drives failed all the time. We had SideQuest drives. We got zip disks, and there was constantly this idea of like, how do I archive my work? And so for me, it's been a constant battle over 26 years, and having a body of work 26 years, it's like, how do I make sure that this work that I've been making outlives me, right? So this idea of preservation or catalog of all this image making that I've been making for 26 years has been really fascinating to me. And so I think for me, the blockchain is really about that idea of, I've said this a few times. It's like if a book publisher wants to publish a retrospective of your work, eventually that book has to end. So that book is only sort of a finite moment in your career of image making. And the blockchain really promises that as long as you keep living, you can keep making work that is cataloged in a way that at least we know is maybe going to last 200 years. Then there's this idea of authentication. So there's no question that I am the author of said work. That's really interesting. And then the other part that I maybe want to talk about that I think seems to be missing from the conversation is one these days I'm going to die. And the idea that I can pass my public key on to my daughter and she can pass it on to her families for generations to come, then becomes this idea of estate. So not am I building a permanent catalog, but I'm building this idea of estate that I can pass down to my family for generations. So I'm super excited about the technology.
I think we're going to dive into a lot of those questions because I already get the sense from everybody. We're not really here interested in talking about the fine art practices of NFT. We're thinking about where we're going next. So Jordan, how about yourself, my friend?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I'm Jordan. I co-founded Codame Art and Tech with my partner Bruno over 10 years ago. And this was back in the Flash days. We had a bunch of friends coming into town for a conference, a work conference. And then I was doing a lot of music event promotion, things like that, running net labels. And we decided to just throw an event to show off all the stuff, the cool stuff that people were doing on the sides. So got a rooftop, went off, police showed up. It was a real party. And it was just like full of projectors, people making music with like drum machines they programmed themselves and things like that. So we had no idea how it was going to go, if that was going to be like a hit or not. Way more people showed up than any of the music events I was promoting, and we kept on getting asked when's the next one. And 10 years later, we're still riding that energy. And to me, it's so cool because I was like fortunate enough to grow up in an environment where I had a dad who was an engineer, an electrical engineer, and both of my parents were photographers. So they were really encouraging my whole life of just like exploring, playing with these things. And like my first art project was probably soldering LEDs onto a little circuit board that had our like R2D2 silk screened on it. So I didn't have any memory. It would stick the battery in and it would blink. And things have come a long way since then. Blockchain to me is another tool. I think that all of these things are tools, and it's really the human connections, and even talking about estate and things like that. They're enabled by tools, but it's important because it's going on to a daughter, or you've created a foundation that has resources to like have a community outlive a single person, things like that. So it's very much a tool, and it's an interesting tool. And one of the trends that I see, and I'm hopeful for, is like another work revolution. I feel like we're on the cusp of another work revolution where we've gone through like the industrial revolution and the information revolution. And I feel like the next thing is maybe something like a decision-making revolution where people aren't making decisions anymore, or a creative revolution where creative will actually be valued in a way that's not just like monetary, but people will realize how important stories are and connecting with each other is. And I think that as people are waking up to the internet, seeing the importance of owning your data, the importance of privacy, sovereignty, and all those things, it's kind of entering the vernacular where these things are, being paid attention to, and blockchain is part of that story. So that's what it means to me.
That's really interesting. I think that we're going to touch on that as well in a short little bit. But and finally, myself, I'm Elburz Sorkhabi. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks for having me. Crypto Art Week Asia. It's really exciting for all of us to be here chatting. Quick line about me: I'm the co-founder of the Interactive and Immersive HQ, which is the most comprehensive TouchDesigner professional training place that you can get on the internet. I've been in this business, I think so. I probably consider, I think I'm the youngest one, right? I'm just tipping on that 30 line, and I've been doing this for just over a decade. And my career started with TouchDesigner. And going through this career, one of the things I've always really been fascinated with, and something that's been like a real meaningful struggle for me over my life, is how do I turn this into a living? Because right from the get-go, when I quit music school from a classical trombone soloist was the thing I was doing at that time, immediately it's like, oh man, I got to pay bills. I got to take care of myself. Got to try and help out the family. Got to find a place to live. And how do I marry that with artwork and art making and creativity? And I think that's been a big driving force behind a lot of my perspective on whenever I look at any tool. The first thing I think is like, is that going to make us some money? Is that going to make somebody some money? And that's kind of the way I look at crypto and NFTs, and not in the sense of how can 10 people make $1 million? I think that's cool, but it's also a bit of a novelty. But can that energy be turned into 100,000 people making $1,000? Because then all of a sudden, Jordan, especially going back to that work revolution, we have this idea of independence of artists in their creative practice, in their business practice, choosing what kind of projects they want to do. So that's kind of what tickles my funny bone, is how can we get lots of people to make some money in a really ethical and genuine way with their artwork? So I think that's probably like, it seems that we're all thinking about this from a similar angle. I would say one area that I'm least interested in is this idea of NFTs becoming the new fine art. You know, for me, that doesn't really seem like it's going to change much for the everyday developer or everyday creative. I don't think that's going to push the industry in any way. And I think if we're talking especially about all of us who come from that interactive and real-time background, it seems like it doesn't really have a gel point to it. Am I mistaken on that? Or does somebody think there is some kind of gel point where our interactive work kind of meets this fine art industry?
I think they meet. I think that this is a line that, you know, Kodame has been writing for all of these years. And it's interesting that when people who aren't from the fine art world look at Kodame, like just creatives in general, or like creative developers, they think that Kodame is some kind of like institution that is fine art. And in some ways we are. We've worked with, you know, major museums and all those kinds of things. So there's an interaction there, and I'm not dismissive of the fine art world, even if all of the values don't line up with my own. There's something there. And I think that some of the cool things about that the fine art world finds in NFTs are also applicable to everyday collectors. Like a lot of fine art folks will collect work and then it sits in a warehouse or something, right? Because it's more of an investment than anything else. If you're doing that with an NFT, you don't have to worry about humidifying the area to be sure the thing doesn't melt, or, you know, whatever else. And the preservation aspect is like kind of a tricky topic. It's the same thing with like how you can say that blockchain is trustless. In the end, it really comes down to humans trusting each other. And in the end, an NFT is a certificate that something exists, and it's up to somebody to preserve it and actually make sure that that JPEG or that program or whatever else is still around in however many years. But I do think that the things are touching. And on the preservation tip, I think it's also interesting how people are so obsessed with things lasting forever. Performance artists don't worry about that at all, and it's all about the moment. And if it exists in that moment, that is the most real thing that could have ever happened, and any other recording of it is just an artifact that can't even touch on the real thing. So there's that end of it, and then there's the people that make sculptures that are as big as a mountain, and they won't go anywhere until weather has its way. But we're in the middle. I think all the things touch. All the things touch.
And I think that connects to, Joshua, what you were mentioning about this idea of estates and preserving history. When you're thinking about this concept of, you know, the digital artist estate, is that also connected to this kind of fine art mindset or background, or is it more of almost licensing and more of a technological estate that somebody might be holding?
I think, you know, for me, you know, I had kind of like an epiphany moment with Stefan Sagmeister like several years ago. And it was when he was making his Happy film. And we started talking about like, you know, what do you really need in order to be happy? And there's this interesting topic in his movie about how the median of the amount of money that you need to make in order to be happy is very nominal. And so I had this moment with him where I was, you know, giving talks all around the world, and I'm standing up on stage and I'm looking out over, you know, 3,000 people, and I, you know, look down at my shoes and I'm wearing like $35 Vans, and everybody else has like a Louis Vuitton bag. And I just looked at Stefan and I said, I think everybody in the audience makes more money than me. And he says, they do. And he says, but they're probably miserable. And he's like, you get to wake up every day and sort of just make the kind of work that you feel compulsed to make. And so there, how much money do you really need to make in order to be happy? So for 25 years, I've lived pretty modestly. So, watching the whole NFT financial thing, it really hasn't been a really big appeal to me, because I have figured out how to sort of, live each year, do certain projects with certain collaborators in order to make money to pay my mortgage. And so I've really been more focused on, like, how do I catalog the work that I make, and how do I preserve it? And how do I, pass it on to, I'm also about open source. So, not only am I doing image making, but I'm usually always including how I made the work by providing the code. And so again, I'm not necessarily really interested in the financial aspect. I think that's great that people are, have found a way to sort of survive COVID. I know this was like a life preserver for a lot of people, and that's really fantastic. For me, it's about, it's like, when I die and I stop paying my Dropbox account, I lose my entire life's work. And so for me, this is more about, preservation of all this wacky shit that I've made over. Am I allowed to curse? Oh my gosh, sorry about that.
We're all adults here. Yeah. Off the record, I know how our industry talks, so I think we're clean here.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was trying to keep it on the clean. So I'm much more interested in, again, like sort of preserving that catalog. And again, I'll go back to that idea of a book. If you do a retrospective, books don't last, And so there's a real appeal about, am I able to share, just what I've been doing over the course of half of my life? And the interesting thing that I think that has kind of caught me off guard is that, for 26 years, I've had the art world tell me, what you're doing is not art. But meanwhile, I've given talks at like every museum on the planet, so Tate will have me come and give a talk about this generative art I'm making. I've given talks almost at every museum, but I've never had a gallerist, and I don't know if I've ever really sold a piece of work, because I think for 26 years, how could you buy it? How could you buy a program? And so that's been a really fascinating aspect and this is something that I've had conversations with people about, and that he's kind of been spreading the word about, was that there was really never a way to collect or put an aspect of value onto this work that we're making. And so, for me, I have this compulsion to make stuff. I wake up every day and I want to try to figure out how to use purple and orange and triangles and freak out people's eyeballs, whether that's in a public setting, whether that's, just in front of a screen. Like, I have this compulsion to make things. And the idea that I can put it on the blockchain, a collector can say, I love that so much that I want to own it in some sort of aspect, is just icing on the cake, but it certainly doesn't drive my art making practice.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I wouldn't have approached it from that side of preservation and almost like passing down the legacy of like, here's all the work that I've made, almost in that nice little collection that you pass on to your kids, like an heirloom almost.
Yeah, but I mean, we can also have, there's a great documentary right now on Netflix, and I'm sure all of you guys have seen, about the Knoedler Gallery, who was accidentally selling fakes. Like they were selling fakes of they were selling fakes of Robert Rauschenberg, but they were getting authenticated by Robert Rauschenberg's like son or something like that. Or no, it wasn't Rauschenberg, it was Rothko. Rothko's son is like, yep, that's my dad. And it wasn't, they were fakes. So there's even this whole idea of like, in the case of me, like I have a lot of wide format printers. And so I still like the idea of a tactile print. So, I'm writing this software that is generating artwork infinitely, and I'm capturing sort of a moment of time. And that moment of time is surprising to me, just as it is to the viewer, because it's that moment of time has evolved in the program that I wrote. Then I'm rendering out these stills, and then I'm printing them out and giving people physical objects. So, I'm printing out these physical prints when you buy one of my NFT. You can decline it. If you're an NFT purist and you just want the NFT, then don't accept the print. If you look at the wordage that I'm using in my NFTs, I'm saying you have the option to have the physical thing. But the nice thing is that you're getting this physical object. You also have the NFT, which is a video representation of the thing, and it also acts as a certificate of authenticity. And so it's been this really fascinating way to be able to sort of dip my toe into the art world, which for the past 26 years, I've kind of always been at arm's length. And I would say, just last thing, and I'll shut the hell up, is, it took photography a long time for photography just to get recognized as a viable art form. And so I think this is what's happening with NFT. It's just going to be another little slice in part of the art world, and some people will navigate it, and that's great. And some people will still do photography, some people will still do painting, and I think this is just a new way of participating in the art world.
I think that's a really interesting and wholesome way to approach it, a way for people to participate in the art world that maybe isn't as cost prohibitive as fine art might be. And Jaymi, I think that's an interesting kind of segue, coming back to your ideas and thinking about the different kinds of applications and what we can actually put on blockchain. Because I think that's going to be the next frontier that's pushed. Because obviously at the beginning there was images, videos, music. Then all of a sudden you started seeing Ableton projects on there. And then I saw some TouchDesigner projects on there and I think like a lot of the other crypto platforms, the dApps are going to start popping off. Do you think the NFT scene, and at least art when it comes to blockchain, is going to go into this direction of maybe there's going to be an interactive platform where we actually just code right in the NFT platform? Or do you think it'll really stay focused around the output of what people are making?
Yeah, well, so I think for me, coming back to what I was saying earlier on, is this ability to be able to participate in the exchange of value between different parties, right? So this is where I think the transformative aspect of it is happening. So I was seeing a German student guy that put together Space Buds. This was something his final year in Germany for a student project. Managed to code this out on the Headquarter platform in about a month, and then was able then to I think he put like 10,000 unique Space Buds and put them all out for 50 TES per piece, and then was able to pretty much settle all of his college fees and college things that he needed to do to get himself through that patch. Which for me I find really fascinating, because if you look at that, juxtapose that with the fine art world and trying to get access to it. So as I said, oldest new kid on the block, having spent a lot of time in the sort of business sphere, and then literally doing a 180 on myself and starting my own experience agency. The catalyst for that was projection mapping. So got into doing live gigs, got into using Resolume, got into using TouchDesigner eventually. So we got to meet Elburz as well with the HQ Pro. And then you sort of start to, so my story is pretty much straight from Southampton in the UK. So I don't come from a privileged background. So I've never really had any exposure to the fine art world in that sense. So not that, so you can look at the way that the collector and the creator are connecting. And this is where I think some of the important things are happening now. So there was a story I heard recently on another talk where there was a particular dance move that was became very embedded in the TikTok sphere. But the actual creator of the dance was like an 8-year-old girl on the west coast of the States, I think, but was never really credited with the invention or creation of that move. But then through the architecture and through blockchain, through NFT, that notoriety, that acknowledgement of that creative process was able to be achieved. Don't know if she was ever able to capitalize on that, or even if she had the motivation to even want to capitalize on it, because that I think is another key underlying philosophy or ideology that I see developing in the entire sort of blockchain sphere as well, is that I'm seeing a lot of, and maybe it's a creator's bias. I tend to think that creative people don't necessarily approach their lives through a mercantile lens. You don't come at this thing saying I need to make money. Of course you need to pay the rent, of course you need to do these things, but there's often a compulsion behind your behavior. You need to make something. So I'm a tinkerer. I like to tinker with all the different DMX setups. I like to tinker with the lights. I like to blend the laser system with the projection mapping and to create a, as it is in Singapore, we were busting out some big ass parties for a good 2-3 years and growing them from 300 people to 3,000 people on beach parties and doing big gigs, which we miss a lot. But in terms of the come back to what Jordan's saying. It's a tool, right? So as a tool, the application and utility of that tool is then exposed to people that are generally biased towards being creative. So as to what content might be expedited on NFT rails in the future, I'm really excited about how augmented reality and virtual reality will play into this sphere. I'm seeing an upswing in things like VTubers, so people sort of enabling themselves with simple mocap systems like an XN suit plus some live faceware.
Some of
And
those
then,
are insane now.
yeah, and really then extending themselves into a meta person and then putting themselves into the metaverse, if you use that phrase. So by extension, your estate, in some respects, then it could be almost infinite, right? So you could see how that will continue to progress, but it has a magnetic effect, I think, as well, because you keep pulling in new things and new causes and new places. And I think that's the other thing that's piqued my interest as well, is just how minority groups are also able to much more easily participate and be fairly recognized for their contributions. I think that's really important. So I've had a friend of mine, Vince Fraser, just show his work recently at Art Tech House in New York. But his work got then segued into Times Square and put on the big LED boomboards out there. So yeah, who'd have thought that would have happened? When I met the guy on a gift fest in Singapore 2 years ago. No way, right? So now we're seeing this amazing talent get the exposure that it deserves. But importantly, now if you code that into a certificate that exists on a essentially trustless environment, notwithstanding the technical requirement that I've seen examples where people have gone to look at their NFT that they purchased and it's not there, and they're, oh my God, where's it gone? And of course, the asset itself needs to live somewhere else, maybe on IFPS or some other system. But then it's the second market, and the fact that the smart contract that you write around this is ad infinitum. So I love that concept of it being something that could accumulate or forever create the commensurate return to the originator, if that's a way to say it. Yeah.
I think it's
There's
really
some funny
interesting.
things. Just to,
Sorry, go ahead,
if you don't
Josh.
want, I got a few things I want to touch on. Is when we were younger, we used to go to concerts and we would save the ticket stubs, and we used to hang them on our wall, and it was sort of proof that, like, I saw The Cure in the '80s, can't take that away from me. And so when you start to think about this sort of thing like digital collectibles, I was invited to the first Minecon, which is Minecraft's conference, like back in Vegas. And if you were a participant of that conference, you got a special cape in game. So like my character in game, like I can fly around and people are like, holy shit, like how did you get that? I was like, oh, well, I was at the first Minecon. So, we're a bunch of older dudes. If you start to shift away from how old we are and look at what this younger generation values, the idea of people buying skins in Fortnite, like if you don't understand like how big that concept is, so then what is an NFT? So, an NFT can be an image, it can be a video, but it also could be, proof that you were at, your concert and you got laser beams shot into your face, right? So it also becomes a sort of badge of honor, just like we used to hang those concert tickets on the wall. Now, I just wanted to say one other thing is that, we're using environments that are dynamic, like TouchDesigner. And there's already a lot of platforms that are up right now and already running. For example, Art Blocks is a really great place where they're doing sort of generative stuff, and you're buying an NFT, but you're buying NFT, which is like an access to a generative thing that lives in a browser that runs in real time. Like that isn't science fiction. That's already happening. You got Casey Reese doing that with Feral File. And what I think is going to happen that I find really fascinating is there was a gentleman, it was a team of 3 guys, and they did everything in Unreal Engine, and it was a Zen Garden. So if you do like Zen Garden NFT, they generated, I think, 8,888 Zen gardens that were all generative. So it would generate the branches, it would generate the leaves, and then they had this probability that some were rarer than others, just like CryptoPunks. I think that project made like over $2 million in 1 hour. But the fascinating thing about that is that people are willing to participate in experiences, acquire things when they haven't even seen what the final outcome is, which means somebody wanted to buy a Zen garden, but they had to buy it in order to see what it was going to look like. They were going to, I don't know if that's much different than going to the grocery store and putting a quarter in one of those things and turning the thing and you get a ball and what sticker did you get, right? And so, I envision, at least for me, I have the capability and the space and the technology to say, I'm going to promise you this aesthetic, but you're the input. And the NFT purchase could be you arriving at a location. That location could be made with LED walls. It could have sensors. It could have all sorts of stuff and say, okay, the purchase of your NFT, you spent, X number of dollars. You can enter this room. You have 30 seconds to execute gesture. And whatever you do in that room, the technology is going to be looking at you as the input. It's going to generate the artwork. That then becomes the NFT that's on the blockchain. People are going to be willing to purchase and acquire things before they've even seen them yet. This is going to exist in art galleries. It's going to exist at concerts, where people are going to want to get that digital collectible where they can say, hey, I bought this NFT. And the animation and the input of this NFT is me being 30 seconds in this room that had absolutely nothing in it until I entered the room. So what is an NFT? I mean, sky is the limit here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this brings up an interesting point. We're going to shift a little bit, talk about royalties, because actually George Galley, who's a fantastic artist and helping organize this whole thing, put a really great kind of anecdote in the chat for us, which kind of ties back to a lot of the things what we're saying. And Jordan, then I could throw to you to talk about royalties. But George was saying, I love the idea of preserving. My dad was a musician, and the royalties we get is not huge, but it's more like a connection we still have to him. And the financial incentive of the record industry is what keeps his body of work alive. And I think that was a really touching way to kind of connect both these ideas of, Joshua, like you were saying, this idea of preserving work, keeping that connection, keeping the body of work kind of in rotation and alive in some sense, and tying that to some financial motive where, like Jaymi and Jordan, you were saying, we make a piece, and then the exciting thing in these smart contracts is it doesn't immediately leave your control the second it leaves your computer, where there is this idea of, well, now the artwork lives on, but I'm kind of tailing it a little bit as the original creator. So Jordan, I know you wanted to touch in on royalties a bit as well.
Absolutely. That's definitely a big part of why I'm even in the NFT space. But to just riff a little bit more on what Jaymi and Josh were saying about what's coming with NFTs and what artists are doing in the space, I think that the thing that artists are great at is sense making and coming up with all these crazy use cases for things. So we're really at the tip of the iceberg. Looking at a thing and minting it and saying this is done is like the most basic thing you can do with an NFT. So like the proof of access is another great thing, and we're seeing a lot of that right now too, because that's like rewarding people with NFTs for just doing things that we want them to do. So it's an easy like marketing toy. And then on the other side, like the gating, of course, like that's another mechanic, and there's just so many possibilities. And that's what the artists are going to bring out, is like all the what ifs. And that's what I love about when I'm bringing artists into the space with Codeme, to get back to the royalties thing. Like Codeme exists to help artists be rewarded for what they do. And monetary compensation is part of that. We all agree that that's like one part of it, and that if it wasn't for our drive, we wouldn't be here, because we all have things that we could do that would make us more money if we weren't doing purely art. But the financial compensation matters, and sometimes it's not the amount of money, but just that it was acknowledged in that way. So whenever we do a show, we split out the income to all of the artists, and whenever we do sales, that all gets split. And I don't love living in spreadsheets, doing all those splits is not a lot of fun. So when I saw on the blockchain, we could do automatic split royalties. That was an epiphany. That was like, what? We don't have to move these numbers around by hand anymore? Brilliant. And that was a big part of how, like, Kodame last year, we started doing NFTs. Some artists like Shar Styles were already on the environmental tip, like worried about that. And we were like, okay, we got to find a clean chain that can do these splits for us. And wound up finding Mintbase on Near. And that was like, for us, a big deal to be able to do both of those things for our artists, like listening to our artists and being able to do both of those things for them. One of the things that I love about working on the Near chain too is that everything is, the royalties are baked in at the protocol level. So it doesn't matter which store you're interacting with, the royalties live from store to store. I think that that's something that the chains are all going to have to figure out, is like the interoperability and like how the royalties are going to work across all of these layers, because it gets complex fast. But seeing it implemented at the chain level is a really cool thing.
I think it really ties in like to this idea of FOMO, digital takeaways, you know, because this, as somebody who's doing a lot of just like commercial projects and these kind of things, you know, the digital takeaway feels like it was cool for about 5 minutes, and then everyone had a digital takeaway, and it felt like it really just, you know, it felt like almost a worse version of the concert ticket, because at least the concert ticket, you had it was a physical object, you put it on the wall. But you know, in the stream of
like putting things on the wall, like people just stream now, they don't want to hold a record. Like, what is the reliability? Okay. You got to make sure that doesn't go anywhere.
But I think it's an interesting idea to think about, especially when, you know, we're talking about these people could come into an experience, be the impetus of the NFT being generated. Then they have not only a digital takeaway, but it's something of value that they can hang on to, or even start to trade. You know, because I've recently just got into NBA cards, which is a weird detour for me, because I never, you know, grew up watching sports, and now I got buddies who are getting me into it, and I find this weird draw to it, where I kind of like just having the cards of the players I like. It's almost like a weird show of moral support, but also, you know, in my head, I'm like making my dream team. I'm almost curating my own team in a sense. And I think
to riff off that, what I find absolutely shocking is how many personal conversations I have with my collectors, which I don't know if that's ever existed before, where, you know, obviously this conversation is happening on Twitter, but there's this, you know, I don't want to bring up like the meta cheese, but it kind of feels like that. It feels like these people who, you know, I've had conversations where I've had collectors say, you know, your artwork makes me feel a certain way, and I want to give you money to make sure that you keep doing it, you know, and certainly, you know, I've said that like about Matthew Barney, like, God, I hope everyone gives Matthew Barney money, because that guy makes weird shit and I want to keep watching it, right? And so isn't that what we do? Like now when we go to concerts and we go to movies, like we are patrons of these people to help make sure that they keep doing the art that they're doing. And so what I find absolutely fascinating is having these kind of conversations with collectors on Twitter, like having this one-on-one dialogue, like, hey, you know, please let me know when you decide to do something new. You know, I'm in for the long game. So I think, you know, to date, I think I've only done like 15 NFTs or something. I haven't done a lot, you know, because I believe in scarcity and I'm in no rush. But it's amazing the conversations that I've had with people. And I just don't know if that, and again, I can't speak to the art world. I would love for someone to tell me, but this idea of the collector having an intimate relationship with the artist in hoping that they keep making work and in supporting them in a way so that they do keep making the things that they're making, I find absolutely amazing that I've had these kind of intimate conversations with the people who collect me.
Yeah. I mean, that must be the most liberating feeling right there. I mean, that's Jordan going back to that kind of revolution.
Imagine LeBron James saying, you know, thank you so much for collecting my card.
Well, I don't have a LeBron yet. I'm just getting started. That's a pricier.
But I mean, that's a pricier card. where does that exist? You know, like if you think about sports in general, like I would think maybe the closest thing would be skateboarding, where you could roll up at a park and also a pro would be there, you know. But other than that, there's always kind of this invisible wall between, you know, you as the fan and, you know, the person that you're trying to either idolize or collect. And I think a lot of that wall has been evaporated with NFTs, which I find amazing.
We're still early enough that it's like the weird internet phase. Like,
Yeah, everything's still just insane.
because we're all here, and that'll change in time. But for now, it's really nice, and it's also cool.
Jordan,
the transparency.
I couldn't agree with you more that this feels like such early 90s internet. And there's so much a part of me like, okay, when does this go sour? Like, I'm always just kind of like, I feel like I'm like this, but it really does feel, and I don't, you know, again, I'm sure we can all speak about this where, you know, just feels like the internet just got boring. Everything right now just feels like totally on Red Bull now. Alive.
Yeah,
amazing.
I think that's again with that participation thing. You know, at the macro level, you've got all this kind of the shifts that happen, either politically or environmentally or technologically, right? And we've had all three of those factors hit us through the COVID times, which has forced eyeballs to online environments for consumption. I think if you looked, I've got three children, 17-year-old, two 12-year-olds. You know, you look at some of the things that they participate in and what they ascribe value to. And I think this is a really fundamental thing in terms of where the shift and the fulcrum of where value is changing a lot. I did a lot of work on my old life with the automotive industry, for instance. And I remember a talk from the global CMO from BMW. This was 10 years ago plus, saying that people don't want to buy cars anymore. Right, so they were already innovating then to shift their entire business model to creating an integrated transport system that would become BMW based upon a single platform or a dual platform system, so they could just modularly put their tin on top of it. They said they're not going to be in the business of selling tin anymore, and I think that I find is where the liberation comes from, because actually, given the choice and given the opportunity and having the means to do so, you know, where are you going to direct your disposable income or your disposable time? And I think up until then, you may have been distracted with the passive consumption of traditional mainstream media, but now you've got this opportunity to actively participate, like literally have a conversation with the artist, as you just mentioned, Josh, right? And that reward loop is far stronger than all previous experiences that you could have created. So another example, which is quite exciting, which I've seen some good executions of as well, is volumetric video capture, which is something I'm really fascinated by. And then using AR to reproject that content back into an actual environment, right? Either through your phone, and of course the tech that will allow us to mediate AR in the future is going to get better, Nreal glasses, or whoever knows where that's going to go, right? It will change. But imagine, having that, back to the skateboard analogy, I want Tony Hawk's in my living room, right? I want Tony Hawk's for my kids, and I want to go around him 360 with my iPad. I want to see that kind of cool shit going on, and being able to, and then as that tech gets stronger, you can even live stream the volumetric feed, right? When you've got 5G coming down the wire, we're not going to be inhibited by that kind of substructure anymore, as it was in the old days of early internet. But certainly, the energy around this thing, having been around the block a couple of times as well, I get the same reaction. It's like, that's why I'm in it, because I'm not going to miss it this time. The last time I was still a bit young, believe it or not. So Netscape passed me, and I spoke to bosses that I had at the time and said, wow, look at this Netscape thing. It's going to be awesome. But they at the time were Microsoft degens. And they said, no, Bill Gates is saying that the internet's going to be a passing fad. How wrong could they have been, right? How wrong could they have been? The games industry, talking about the utility and the different, again, on the Ethereum chain, at least anyway, with the different types of NFT contracts that you can write, the one that becomes a functioning item, I think, is probably where you're going to see some scope for a lot of change and a lot of creativity.
I think for our final quick topic here before we have our sign off, one thing that I found interesting is a lot of our discussions have been about artist and collector, or artist to public. One of the things I've been really interested about with the NFT space is is really seeming to break down the barriers even between the creators themselves. And it seemed to just, like we're talking about this early internet idea, you're just getting people coming out of the woodwork from all different kind of softwares, backgrounds, technology uses, like what different art styles. Everyone's kind of coming together in these shared spaces. And I think that's one of the things that probably drew us all to speaking at Crypto Art Week Asia and like this conference, is this idea of, it seems like lots of really interesting folks are kind of colliding in this space. So I'm kind of interested to see if you guys have any ideas where that might head as well.
Yeah, for sure. On the front of kind of thinking about those barriers dissolving, I see it not only happening like between artists coming together as a crowd, but just like the roles dissolving too, between like curators, collectors, and artists. Those roles are starting to blur as, a popular artist's feed is a curation system. And as artists become successful, especially in the crypto art space, I see artists supporting each other. So they're becoming collectors. And to see those lines blurring is really fascinating. And I think that that's one of those like crypto time hyper shifts that is happening towards that like creative revolution I'm talking about, where there's more of the peer-to-peer value happening. And you're talking about your basketball cards and them being silly, but we're all crows. We like shiny things. And it doesn't matter if it's a physical card. I'm like deep in the magic rabbit hole. It's fun having little things that you can shift around. And if it's cards, physical cards, that's great. If it's digital stuff, it's even better. And with you're saying that the digital giveaways were starting to like feel a little bit faded and like, oh, they're not as exciting. But just last month we did Near was at Bitcoin Miami, and as part of that, we did a online gallery or a in real life gallery and gave away an NFT on our Twitter feed from an artist Pixel Lord, who I've been chatting with since IRC day, so it was really cool to work with him. But that had so much engagement. We had like over 20K new followers from dropping an NFT, just giving away an NFT. And it's really about that connection that people feel. If somebody vibes on the NFT and it resonates, then they're going to be excited about it. And it doesn't matter if it's a still image or a moving image or even what the format is. It's that, again, human connection of like, when you read a book by an author that you love and you think, I could talk to this person, I feel like I know them, like, that's the connections that happens regardless of the media. So I think that there's a lot there that can be dug into.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as like, we were also talking about the just some tips for artists in general. There's the wayfinding that's happening. Don't be afraid to experiment. Try out a bunch of platforms, try different things, give it a shot, see what sticks. With the Kodame artists, they're always asking me like, what should I be minting? How should I be pricing it? Things like that. Try things out. Do an edition of 100, do an edition of 1,000, do an edition of 1. Try things out. A lot of the artists I see are having more success with high editions priced low because people will grab them. And they'll wind up making more than if they had done a single edition and priced it even at like $2,000 or something like that, in the thousands of dollars. So it's a game to play.
Mm-hmm.
Have some fun, try things out. There's a lot of space to explore.
Yeah, and that's I think that's a sort of really important point as well. I think the barriers to entry now and the net cost of distribution is literally zero in many cases, right? Unreal Engine is free, so I've spent the last, sorry Elburz, I've drifted from TouchDesigner a bit into Unreal
We
Engine.
peaked Unreal now too, don't even worry, bro, we got you covered.
So I've hit Unreal Engine for the last 12 months and got in that rabbit hole for virtual production for my day job. But it's free, right? And Epic keeps buying ArtStation, and it keeps buying Quixel. Wow, right? I mean, gosh, the speed at which now you could introduce yourself into this and liberate your own creative talents is amazing. And I know there's a little barrier to entry for Notch, but they may work that out in the future. But TouchDesigner is one of the OGs, right, for getting access to that system as well. So I think barriers to entry, and it makes me think of back in the days when I joined my first proper job in London, and the company, it was 50 people, and the company didn't have email. And I was like, well, why don't you have email, right? You've got to have email so everyone can talk to each other and chat to each other. But then many years later, I remember having a conversation with a friend who's now one of the Asia partner lead for Sequoia, and he said, if you had the chance to reinvent email, what would you do? Right, and of course now we've got WhatsApp, we've got all the messenger platforms. It's synchronous rather than asynchronous. So I guess the same thing goes here. Is if you could reinvent the way that art is created and distributed and sold, what would you do? And I think that's what we're witnessing now.
And Joshua, what about you? What would you bring to the table from your experiences with NFTs so far?
I think the last thing that I would just like to say is that, and Jordan talked about this a bit, is we're seeing like a massive redistribution of wealth. We're seeing artists spending money on other artists, and it's also your opportunity to embrace inclusion. So NFTs is not all old white dudes. There's amazing women in the space. There is amazing people of color in the space. There is great representation for LGBTQ, the trans community. And it's an opportunity for you to give power back to those communities that are underrepresented in the fine art world. And to me, that's it. That's it.
I think the final thing I'd add to that is, I think it's almost my default answer when anybody asks me for advice about basically anything about our industry, which is just be hungry. There's nothing worse than not taking all the opportunities in front of you. I always say there's far more opportunities than there are artists. I've never gone in my life and had a shortage of work. The only times I had that was when I had a shortage of energy. So I always tell everybody, be hungry, take those risks. Really, there's almost nothing like bad that can happen in most of these cases, and have some fun, because when you're having fun and you're doing the thing you love, I think people see that and they'll resonate with that and have that connection that we've all been talking about in different ways. So with that said, I think we are at the end of our time here. So I'd like to go around and everyone give a little sign-off line and let people know where they can find out more about you or connect with you. Jaymi, how about we start with you, my friend?
Thanks, Elburz. Given that we kicked off as well, thank you. I really enjoyed the chat. Great to meet you. Great to meet you, Jordan, Joshua. Really fascinated, and I'll definitely send out a link to get hooked up beyond this. For Mischiefmakers, you can go to mischiefmakers.sg. And actually, we're doing a collaboration with CryptoArt Week Asia with an in real life gallery pop-up experience next week here in Singapore, which will have some online streams as well, called Future Space. Which is about imagining the blurring of the lines between where will art, performance, and commerce exist in the future. This is the AR, the VR, the in real life. So got some fun things happening there. So check us out on Facebook. That's happening at Ultra Super New Gallery Singapore.
Amazing. Thank you, my friend. And Jordan, how about yourself, my friend?
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. Great ripping around the concepts. Can find my own artwork under Star Pause, like pause on a tape deck. It's all under the Creative Commons, so you can remix it, reuse it. The only thing I ask is attribution. And then for my art and tech organization, Codame, CODAME, bunch of consonants and vowels. Check it out. And then Near Protocol is where I'm currently working and love it. It's a lot of fun to be bringing all of this technology to creators as my job. And if you have an idea or a concept and you want some advice on like shaping it up into a thing, I'm always open to that kind of stuff. I've been doing it for years and years with Codame, and I'm now thankfully getting paid tech job money to do it too. So yeah, happy to speak to all of you more in the future.
Amazing. Thank you, my friend. And Joshua?
Yeah, I guess I'll just list two places. I'm mostly just posting the weird stuff that I make on Instagram, and that's Praystation. And then I'm talking on Twitter, and that's Joshua Davis. And those are the two places I hang out the most. And I'm usually just making art and playing video games. So hit me up.
Yes, sign me up is what I should say. And I'm Elburz Sorkhabi. Thanks everybody for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have all these wonderful, talented, and intelligent people having a beautiful discussion about what NFTs could be. If you'd like to know more about myself and the Interactive and Immersive HQ, interactiveimmersive.io. And if you're interested in learning TouchDesigner, that's the place to be. So with that said, thank you everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you in the next one.
Thank you. Take care. Peace.
Thank you.